Thank you.
Hi, Lauren. And
Hi, Gia.
hi, everyone. I wish we could see you. We will cheers to you.
Oh,
Wish we were all
woo.
in the same room drinking warm wine out of plastic cups. But in lieu of that, hope you guys have it queued up. Lauren, I'm so excited to be talking to you. And this book, I'm completely obsessed with it. I'm so excited to be talking about it. I mean, Lauren is one of the absolute masters working today, as we all know. And Matrix, I've already read it twice. My galley was passed like a hot potato from like one friend to the next. Like friends were like mailing it to each other and then texting me about it. And it's just, like as with all of Lauren's work, there's this transcendence and this urgency and this discomfort and discontent and this vision, combativeness, so like all of these questions about asymmetry and power and lost potential and what could have been, what might still be possible. And we're gonna jump into the conversation, but one thing that I have said, like I've talked about this book with so many people already. It's like Matrix, as you guys probably know, it's set in the 12th century. It's this time when the fullness of the natural world is more so than anything that any of us can picture. And I'm tend to be averse to the sort of reflexive description of any book as timely, but this book, I will say it contains one of the most lasting encapsulations of the sort of destructions of the Anthropocene that I've ever read, despite its setting. And I can't stop thinking about that one page about the labyrinth, well, which I'll ask you about. But okay, I wanted to start off by asking you about the research process. Like, how did you generate the texture? It is so vivid and so fresh. How did you generate the texture of their everyday life? Like early on, I think page like 4 or something, there's a detail about someone keeping apricot pits to suck on the extract throughout the winter. These little like fleshly animal details that pervade the book. It's like, I was wondering, what are the records left of details like this, and who wrote them and why?
Yeah. There aren't that many that I found, but I did a great deal of research, right? But I think a lot of academic research that I read was really helpful in, I guess, the overview. But the real animal stuff, as you were saying, it's very granular, right? And you have to get really deep down into it. And there are things like the roles of the cellarists in
Right.
abbeys, where they actually write lists of the things that they buy, and like it's like 20 oxen for oxtails, and you can actually get like deep into sort of some of the daily stuff. But you're right. I was trying to imagine what it would be like to live in a time where there's no timekeeping, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there's no clocks, right? The calendars are set, but I mean, even Easter was fought over. People didn't, they had to figure out when Easter would fall during the calendar year. And you had to basically pay really close attention to the sun and
Mm-hmm.
the sun coming up in order to kind of know what time it was. And so remembering that made me think about how we're just like animals, right? I mean, we really are
Mm-hmm.
animals, and technology is a way of making us forget that we are just really sophisticated primates. Um, and so, like, stripping all that stuff away and going back down into the body and just like
Mm-hmm.
trying to sort of notice the world through the body and take in ideas through the body, which is the way that we all do take in ideas. We just forget it. That was really important. And like the other thing too, Gia, is that I was really daunted at the beginning because I was like, oh my gosh, the 12th century mindset is so different from ours, but at the same time, um, we're all human, right? That like they're
Right.
they're funny. They fart, like they have
Right.
to go to the bathroom, right? They smell bad, right? These are all things that we've all experienced, and so remembering that, maybe I don't know what it's like to be in the 12th century, but I do know what it's like to hold like a warm bowl of porridge, right? That helped me sort of anchor in the time.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder, I mean, because I was thinking also of the way that, I'm sure there were copious records of life at court and probably some sort of abbey specific things like the cellar
Mhm.
lists you're talking about. But there are so, I imagine there's probably not much about the lives of, just common women from the sort of from medieval from this era, right? And so I was wondering if you were, and essentially you're inventing, you're you are bringing to life something that probably was not ever rendered in this kind of detail for any reason.
Yeah, there are some really amazing historians' works that actually go back and try to be like, well, this is what a day might look like, and those are incredibly helpful. But yeah, you kind of have to. I mean, especially since no abbey is the same, right? They'd all be different. They'd all have different needs. Those close to the sea would have more fish in the diet, right? And so you just have to kind of think it through and sort of remember the exigencies of the time and the place. Yeah.
So I want to talk about Marie, our main lady, a real person whose character is still, the specifics and the texture is still mostly invented by you in this novel, and it follows her from age 17 to actually past the end of her life, right? And it's this it's this incredible feat, this condensed portrait of ambition that is really indelible for me. It felt like I spent the first month of the pandemic reading Wolf Hall, and it's the force of that drive, but here, it's condensed into 250 pages. And I was wondering, like, her ambition, the very specific nature of Marie's hard charging ambition is this transformative force on the lives of this sort of reverberating concentric spheres around her. And her ambition at first, she comes at 17, the abbey is, everyone there is near death, their fingernails are blue, they're trying to kill the last ox for like soup meat, it's that kind of a thing. And then she builds it into this, people, something approaching a kind of utopia. But so her ambition at first, it's salvific, right? It's entirely salvific, and then it becomes increasingly complicated. And I wondered if that the nature of that ambition, how you wanted it to shift, how you wanted it to come in and shift and complicate. I wanted to ask you about that. Like, did Marie ride into your book like fully formed the way she does in the first line, or did the nature of her ambition and its consequences sort of take shape as you were shaping the plot and the action of the novel?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. The nature of her ambition changed. I think I saw her as a much more beneficent force in the first few drafts, as almost, and that's not interesting. Nobody really loves a purely good character, especially one who's just sure of her own goodness. So I think that as the drafts progressed and Marie became more powerful, and she began to sort of push at the boundaries of what is acceptable, right? And what is moral. Like, she really does have some pretty profound moral slippages in the book. She began to be much more interesting to me and much more complicated. And I think that I was really interested in the way that a person who's so resistant to a lot of the hierarchical traps, the cages that she fights against with everything she has at the beginning, kind of also, as with the acquisition of power, internalizes some of these cages, and maybe even inadvertently, without actually knowing what she's doing, imposes them on other people. I really, I don't think, last night Ann Patchett asked me if power corrupts, and I was like, maybe, but I think people can justify anything if they think that they're doing the right thing, right? They can justify the worst offenses against other humans if they think that they're on the side of justice. So I always saw her as seeing herself as just like a purely good person, but there's an irony there that I wanted to be fairly strong, that the reader doesn't quite see it the same way.
Yeah, well, and I think towards the end of the book, someone who knows her well is sort of diagnosing Marie's character and says, I think correctly to me, that there is no like evil per se, right? But it's just, things get complicated. You scale any idea and it gets really complicated. The more people are involved in any vision. I mean, in particular, one thing that I have been thinking about over, for example, for the last year, probably because of my pandemic baby, is the way that like a person's desire and capacity to engage in collective care is very easily swallowed into the practice of caring for the domestic unit, right? And there seems to be like, there sometimes seems to me to be a small sin in that, or like an enormous one, right? But the impulse driving it is love and pragmatism, right? The same way that Marie's love for the people at the Abbey and her pragmatism, that you've built something precious and you need to defend it. Like, these are honorable impulses. They're entirely right. But those, you know, the nuns seem to eventually kind of reach another version of the conundrum I've been thinking about all year, right? Where they, in needing to protect something precious, they act in ways that they can't stand behind, you know?
Yeah, that was so eloquently put. I don't think I could make it any better. Except that um, I think that the nature of humanity is so innately complicated that like the simplifications that I think we bend toward in narratives, especially in the beginning of narratives, I think they do a disservice to I don't know I think I'm just trying to say that, like, in the beginning, I thought that the story was much, much simpler, much, much shorter than it was. And then everything sort of fragmented outward. And I had to understand what story I was actually telling. And actually, halfway through, and I know we're going to get to this, but the idea of the labyrinth had kind of been haunting me at the corner of my mind. And when I finally was like, oh my gosh, the actual structure of this book is actually predicated on a labyrinth. I have to actually write the book in a labyrinth form. That actually made the complications more powerful and more intense, because it became a much narrower and, well, not narrow, but like a more condensed book, and a book that's sort of a little bit circular in some ways. And a book that made these contradictions maybe more powerful because they're closer together. I don't know. But it
Oh,
was
tell
this
me.
reaching. Yeah, go ahead.
No. I'm so sorry. Keep going.
No, it was reaching for this structure that revealed a lot of the power differentials and the differences in Marie's like soul, basically the degradation of her morality in a way that I don't think she recognized herself. So yeah.
Yeah, and then there's this question hovering that, not to lean, like to engage in some essentialism for a moment. It's like whether there's a version, like so much of the underlying question is whether what can be built without some form of domination, right? If there is a feminine version, like quote unquote feminine, if there's a feminine version of vision and ambition that can be separated from traditionally male ideas of sort of subjugation and domination, and there's not a clear answer. But I want to, can you tell me more about the labyrinth structure? Like, what does that mean when you realize the structure of your novel as a labyrinth? What does that mean in terms of the way, like, did that involve, like how did that involve sort of chapter structure? And tell me more about that.
The crafty stuff.
Yeah.
So the first few drafts I wrote sort of in more fragmentary form, and they were, I think, the first draft was actually just on index cards because I wanted it to be really tight scenes, really small scenes for the first draft. So I just write like a scene on it and then throw it to the side and do another one. And then the next, but that was so scattered. Like, her life was, it was all over the place. A scene happened when she was like 50, and then another one happened when she was 12. It didn't make any sense. There was no structure whatsoever. And that was fun, right? Like, that was like gloriously fun to make these scenes that had no building momentum. Then when I tried to rewrite, again, I thought that I was doing the right thing by making it like a story that was more interdigitated. It wasn't just straight along. I was really, really frustrated because I did a couple of drafts like that, and nothing was right. It just didn't feel right. And then finally, I realized that I had to, with the labyrinth idea, it's actually more a thematic and imagistic way of organizing the ideas in the story, so that the images go in circles like this. through
Mm-hmm.
the story. And that was like a kind of structure too. And that was the structure that gave me actually the architecture. So it was cyclical images happening through the story, coming closer and closer and closer to like a central idea,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes any sense at all. I mean,
Well,
I would have to like sit down and like go page one. This is, you know what I mean? Like I'm trying, yeah, yeah.
it does make sense. And I wanted to ask you about how you wrote those vision. I mean, I know you're talking about images outside the sort of discrete divine or partly divine visions that Marie has sort of that recur and show her, the plans for the next year, right? That are central to her ambition in many ways. But yeah, I wanted to ask you how you wrote those. How you put yourself in the place to channel these really, really psychedelic, really raw, really transcendent, terrifying, like, did those come to you in the same way? Or, how did you, generate those parts of the book?
So, the most exciting part of the research process was actually when I went back to the work of the time. So I went back to Marie's own work, her lay and her fables, and I went through and I picked out images and I sort of built a superstructure of a biography on that. But I also went back to the work of the actual mystics of the time, and
Mm-hmm.
I read a great number of their visions, right? Especially Hildegard of Bingen, who's like
Mm-hmm.
my
Mm-hmm.
like I kind of want if if I would like to write or and not write, I would just like to have a statue of Hildegard and like
Mm-hmm.
burn incense to her because I think she's like a legitimately saintly person. She was like she's a musician. She
Mm-hmm.
wrote a medical text that was used for 4 centuries. She's an abbess. She's like this visionary, literally visionary person. So I love medieval mystics. I get really excited talking about them
Mm-hmm.
because I find that they're primarily the ones that I'm interested in are women who somehow seize power through imagery, right?
Mm-hmm.
Through and God-given imagery, right? I think that they all believe that these were given by God, um, but it's like gifts in full symbolism that come down to them. So I would go through, and I went through like hundreds of visions, and I plucked out details from a lot of them, and then I just sort of reverse engineered some visions to go for what Marie was trying to grow into as a
Mm-hmm.
person and as an abbess. Um, and like I get really nerdy talking about this because I love the symbology. Like there's so much symbolism in these medieval visions that would have been very apparent to people at the time, but it's not really apparent to us. So you're like they are really hallucinatory, especially for a 21st century reader. But like with like a key and a guide, it becomes a little bit more clear that oh, the green
Right.
means this, right? Like yeah, it's just kind of glorious. And so like you can apply these abstract ideas through the colors, through like the jewels that they use,
Mm-hmm.
through like the size and the kinds of flowers, and all of this like goes into a larger narrative that is sort of underlying the narrative on the surface too.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how those came out, and actually it took a long time to write those because um, I did take so much from other people's visions, but they had to be unique to Marie too. So it was like a balance of um, I don't know, just trying to understand where she would be and what her mindset would be, and trying to
Mm-hmm.
translate like the force of her will through a vision
Mm-hmm.
was pretty difficult actually because I just had lists before that. It's
I
complicated.
I also have a sort of, I mean, one of the reasons, like, once I heard what your new book was about, I was like, oh, I'm gonna fucking love this book. Because I also, I share a sort of longstanding obsession with medieval female mystics in particular, because, for one of, I mean, in general, I have the sort of long time, I was just talking about it with a friend, like, it's something that I used to think about all the time when I got stoned, which was like the reality that for the vast amount of human history in any sort of in any sort of like colonial or patriarchal context, like there were so few ways to free yourself from a life of sort of forced enough childbearing. It's
Yes.
like the only way to
Yeah.
spare yourself having your first kid at 15, and then 12 of them and 4 of them are dying. Like, it's to join an all-female religious community.
Yes.
And one of
Yeah.
and these women, right, they were so the vanishingly few who were afforded a life of the mind and a
Yes.
legitimacy in vision
Yes.
whatsoever, right? And what is left on the page, like, yeah, it is. I mean, you just talking now is reminding me, I mean, the visual vernacular of religious symbology of that time, it is like already so psychedelic and metal, people
Yeah.
carrying their heads up a mountain,
Yeah.
the wheel, and
Right.
all that stuff. Like, it's already fucking crazy.
Yeah. Like a
And
pelican eating his own heart, Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah, and it's just like this casual way. Yeah, and it's and so I always have thought for so long, it's like, oh, I would, like, nunnery life is the way to go. Like,
Yeah.
it's no matter the sort of 12 daily prayer sessions it entails. And I was also, a thing that is often implied about nun life, which is this sort of like bloodless celibacy. To me, I was always like, that was not the case. Like, these ladies were fucking, like, and in this novel, I mean, obviously they are, like, there is an active
These
sexual
ladies are
component.
fucking. Yeah.
These
Yeah.
ladies be fucking. And
Yeah.
this is one of the most utopic aspects about it, honestly, right? I mean, I've been thinking, like, it's, for one thing, it's orgasm decoupled from pregnancy and childbirth, from the
Mhm.
violence of both, right? And
Mhm.
in light of recent events, like, that is especially, it feels, there is something so utopic about this life. Like, there is, like, there's a moment where a character gets pregnant, and it's this awful emergency because they have got, anyway. But I wanted to ask you about how you arrived at, did you envision from the beginning the way that sex is interwoven into the story, into the life of
Mhm.
the characters, and that Marie's, like, erotic drives are central to, her, her life force, really, her animating
Yeah.
force. Tell me about that aspect of, envisioning the nunnery.
Well, as you know, because you're super into mystics too, there's a profound physical aspect to a lot of religious fervor that has,
Mhm.
it's stigmata, for instance, right? Like the
Right.
whole history of, or like the semi-starvation a lot of
Right.
visionaries went through, or actual starvation that they went through in order to have their visions too. So I like this fervor, this kind of fervor, and the erotic have never been that far apart. Right? I actually
Right.
find that like religious fervor is very much animal fervor, passion, in both senses. Um, but with Marie, um, to be perfectly frank, like I I've always wanted to join a lesbian separatist community. Like, that's all I want. I just like want to found an island somewhere beautiful and just like walk around naked and have no men around. I say this in a household full of men. I love my men, but I'm tired of them. Um, but uh, she's so animal, right? Like I just going back to the idea, like she's this really intelligent person. She's very subtle in some ways, but she's also, her life force is a very animal life force. That comes directly out of me and my family. Like we're just animals, and part of that expression is just like the expression through the body of joy and sorrow. Um,
Mhm.
with this book, I actually read this amazing book that one of the premises of the book is that because the people who are codifying the rules for behavior were all men, and a lot of them were celibate men, or men who are supposed to be celibate. Obviously, not all priests were celibate. Um, Not a lot of them had a lot of experience with women's bodies, right? And so I love this part, but so when they were thinking about carnal sin, a penis was always involved, right? Like it was always like there had to be a penis for it to be a carnal sin. Therefore, in almost like a negative sense, if there was no penis, it wasn't a sin. And so
Mhm.
there are many texts that are just saying like sodomy is very terrible, right? Don't do sodomy. But there are very few texts that actually even think about what they called female sodomy at the time, which is just women having sex with other women.
Right.
Just because it didn't exist in their worldview that this could
Mhm.
possibly be a thing, right? like
Right. I
that.
think that nuns have, throughout history, probably have hid quite well. Like,
I know, right? Yes, yeah. And there are actually some historical sources where, abbesses have their favorites who sleep in their bed with them
yep.
forever, or prioresses, have a special servant who goes wherever they go and does everything for them. It's not out of the question that this would have happened. I mean,
Oh,
people are
it would
human, right?
absolutely was. I mean, and as it should. Like, it's. I mean, it. There are, like, I was thinking of The Corner That Held Them, or there, other books where
Yeah.
there's. It's just like, the life of nuns. The idea that this sort of all female community would be chaste is so ridiculous.
Laughable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. No, for
And kind of
sure.
amazing that people, yeah, kind of amazing that, yeah. Okay, I'm going to remind people who are listening to please put questions in the chat. But I will ask a couple more and then we will go into y'all's.
Oh, good.
So, I know from your work, from Florida in particular, climate change is, and also just like being alive right now, climate change is heavy on your mind. You live in Florida.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's heavy on everyone's mind. And I wanted to, like I was saying when at the start of the conversation, like one of the most absolutely devastating parts of the book to me is that, so we were mentioning the nuns construct a labyrinth to protect what they have built for each other, to protect this sanctuary, basically.
Mhm.
And I wanted to ask you about bringing those fears and the understanding of, even actions of care having a sometimes devastating footprint, right?
Mhm.
Into this book. Like, the construction of a medieval abbey, like compared to what probably most of us do on an everyday basis, like that's no destruction at all, right? But it's so
Mhm.
urgent here. There's this paragraph about, that there's this brilliant feat that's been built to protect the sacred thing. And then there's a paragraph of what Marie doesn't see, right? The like squirrels and the
Mhm.
woodpeckers that have been chased from their home, and the birds that won't come back for half a century. And, like implicit behind that paragraph is the enormous sort of devastating negative image of that lies behind, much of what we do. And
Mhm.
I wanted to ask you about if, like, when that became present in the book, because it
Mhm.
is so present. And I think about this as like one of, like, yeah, it really is one of the most devastating bits of literature that I've ever read about the Anthropocene. Yeah, and,
Thank
and
you. Yeah.
was that also like there from the beginning, or?
Yeah, I have so with the understanding that I am in deep love with Hilary Mantel and Penelope Fitzgerald and people who do historical fiction really, really well, I was really ambivalent about doing it myself in book length form, right? Um, uh, Not because I didn't think it could be done um, morally, and I will talk about this more, but because I wasn't sure that I could do it morally. By
Hmm.
morally, what I mean is and this is just my personal belief for my own work, and other people can believe what they want to. I'm not imposing this on anyone, but I really feel like if an artist is not engaging with the largest, most devastating threat, existential threat to humanity, oh, like it's escapism, right? And that's immoral. Escapism is inherently immoral, I would say, right? If you're trying to make arts, right? Not if you're trying to make entertainment. Entertainment's wonderful. I love Netflix also. Um, but so my idea was, well, if I were to do historical fiction, could it possibly be a moral text? Could it,
Hmm.
or would it just be escapism? Um, So I think when this sort of vision of the book came to me, I realized that what I really needed to do for myself, and I don't know if it even goes to other people, is I wanted the present and the past to be in conversation. I wanted
Mhm.
there to be like a two-way, it's almost like a tuning fork, right? There's a vibration that happens between them. And I really, really desperately needed this book to sort of open a portal between the past and the present. and to show possibly that like wherever human beings are, there's climate change, right? Like
Mhm.
the first fire that was intentionally built like killed something, right? For like humans have been killing the climate since we started. It's not that in the 12th century there wasn't climate change, there was, right? Like the building of anything human changes the world, changes the environment. I think I was really interested in the sort of mindsets of the Catholic Church that that was like proto-capitalism. And this is my read. It may not be correct, but I read at that time of the Crusades as sort of imperialism pushing out and sort of the Catholic Church like putting its stamp of approval on imperialism and the idea of the chase of Jerusalem, the capture of Jerusalem, and the seizure of Jerusalem is a good thing as like the beginning of this idea of seeding the world with Christianity, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so I think my my desire to talk about sort of the ravages of climate or of capitalism, the way that it eats everything that it touches, the way that the environmental destruction is hinges on sort of this ravenousness that comes out of like these mindsets of domineering and not taking care of the world, the earth. These are all connected to, you know, the humans of the past too. It's not just the past 40 years, right? It's not just our parents' generation whom we've been blaming, right? It's all of humanity has collectively taken us to this point. So you know, so that was one of the things I was thinking of. And I was also trying to imagine a possible separate path, right? Or if
Right.
it's even possible within the strictures of um, a church hierarchy of the time, if there could have been something separate, something different, something better. I don't
Mhm.
know. I don't know.
Yeah. I'm going to go to audience questions though. I really would love to talk to you about this exact thing for another hour. But so Alicia asked a question, what have each of you been reading and or watching recently that you'd recommend? And I will say that, you know, like all that I can think about is climate change. And I
Yeah.
have been trying to get all my friends to read Kim Stanley Robinson's A Ministry for the Future and Andreas Malm's How to Blow Up a Pipeline. Both are both I found really like galvanizing in terms of my constant sort of buzzing in my like useless buzzing in my head about this. So I'll just, you know, I'll throw that out one for there. Do you have anything you'd like to recommend, Lauren?
Yeah, well, I got into like a Roberto Bolaño kick. Like I love him so much. He's amazing. And with a bunch of friends, I just reread 2666, which is like
Whoa,
I think
what
it's
was it
like
like rereading it?
astonishing. It like
Yeah.
devastating, astonishing. And it was I don't know of anyone contemporary who makes the reader complicit in the evil in the way that
Hmm.
Bolaño does, not only in 2666, but also in By Night in Chile,
Hmm.
and in a lesser sense in other books too. But that sense of complicitousness in the sort of, you know, and almost like turning the gaze back on the reader and saying, you're no better
Hmm.
than these people. Like
Ugh.
that's
That
amazing,
turn in
right? Like,
2666 is like so it's oh.
and he's so funny, right? And he's
Yeah.
so wide ranging, and he's got such a grasp on many different styles. Like he's just an unbelievable master. Yeah, that was amazing. So I've been sort of in a thug. Like I've been reading a lot, but I've been going back to Bolaño a lot.
I will ask a question from Sarah next, which you know I'm asking for selfish reasons. How do you find the mental space for creativity given the state of everything?
Oh, Gia, I know. I also don't have a baby, so that's very hard. I don't, well, I have to say, this has been a really hard year. Uh, Not just in terms of like the worldwide death event, which is also very hard, but like it is so immensely difficult to sit down and actually pay attention to something that feels frivolous, right? I mean, like, fiction isn't going to save anyone's life, like at the moment that you're writing it. Maybe it will if it goes into the world. Um, so I trick myself, and I think that I I have a lot of tricks to fool myself. I get up so early that I can't resist. Like myself, I don't. My brain hasn't kicked in yet when I start working, and then when you have momentum, you just keep going. That's one thing that you can do. But I also I let myself off the hook a lot. Like I have to write every morning at least 1 hour, and it's always bad. It's been bad for like 12 months at this point. I've written 2 short stories in the last 18 months. That's it. I mean, Matrix was done before the pandemic. Um, but um, but I'm letting it be bad, or just not useful, or just not interesting, right? Like, there's so, oh my gosh, Kathy Fish, I think, posted something about writing just 50 sentences, right? And if you number them, you just like some days, that's all I can do is just write 50 sentences. They don't have to be good, but there's some sort of spark of something in at least 5 sentences by the time you're done with that. And I take a lot of hope in that. Just know too that like it'll come back, I think. I mean, if we're patient and we show up for the work too, it'll come back. It will. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, we only have 5 minutes left.
Dang.
So this is a really interesting question from Maggie. I would love to hear both of you talk about how you understand the power of imagery / symbology today. Why I am asking, I love the idea of these nuns wielding visions to exist inside a world run by the church, which is one big language / image propaganda machine. Today, image is everywhere, can't escape it. Does that make it less powerful? Does it make it more? Can it be used for good, not just to rot our attention spans? This is such a good question. It's so complicated. We could talk about this for another 30 minutes, I'm sure. But I wanted to bring up like another thing that I found so arresting in this novel is that the nun, like Marie, is a really good propagandist herself, right? Like she, when she's doing something, she commissions all these songs that people will start singing about the nuns doing something else, right? Like she's a really sophisticated, in terms of this, and that I found, the narrative and image being wielded at cross purposes, that is one of the aspects of this that I found so contemporary. And I mean, I have nothing interesting to say on this subject, but I have been thinking lately about the Sontag idea that I'm going to, ruin it, but I've been thinking a lot over the past 18 months where the world is mostly presented to me in images through screens of the way that it makes you understand the world as something that is happening to other people or something that it makes you feel like everything is happening to another, I don't know, the particular isolation of witnessing the world primarily through image and the sort of alienation, the sort of low level alienation that I think many of us are feeling as a result. That has been heavy on my mind.
I'm so interested in that. So can you unpack that a little bit? I mean, what do you think that that's leading to sort of the stratification and this idea? Have you ever read The City and the City by China Miéville, where there's like 2 cities on top of each other?
No, I've never read it.
Like it's so good, and they're physically the same city, but like people are not allowed to interact. I sort of feel like that's where we are right now, and I wonder if that has something to do with what you're saying with the Susan Sontag bit.
Yeah, it's like the sort of the image as this, this like I now I'm like, I'm not sure, like, it's as this sort of inherently like alienating and defamiliarization, the sort of lie about the way that the world actually is, right? Like I don't know. I mean, the reduction of the world to primarily images has not done good things to my brain, right? It's like, I mean, the world is something that we live in. It's not something that we look at, but lately it is something that we mostly look at. And I do feel like, I mean, and that's not like institutional propaganda of anyone other than like, the tech industry, but yeah, it's doing weird things to my brain lately.
That's so interesting because it's both acting as like a frame, right? It's like framing things in order to like put blinders on everything else.
Yeah.
But it also, yeah, it's making the concrete abstract. And I think that we as humans
Right.
get into problems when that happens, right? Like, yeah, yeah, like pull it back into the concrete, right? Go back into the body.
The
The
animal
body
self.
tells the truth. The animal self.
Okay, last question. I am going to also ask this for leading purposes because I read that beautiful profile of you in the Atlantic, and the writer was talking. So Eleanor asked the question, are you working on other historical fiction stories? When you were a Radcliffe Fellow, you lectured once on a story you were writing, provisionally titled "The Bastard Wilds," which sounded so fascinating too. And then it was dangled in that Atlantic profile that your next novel will also. I forget when it was set. Could you tell us more about the next thing
Yeah.
we'll get to read?
Yeah, it's a radical rewriting of the Bastard Wild. So it's like Robinson Crusoe as a young woman in 1609 after the starving time in Jamestown. And it's basically like holding America's feet to the fire. I don't know. Who knows? I think that it'll be out in a couple of years, knock on wood. Um, I see it as it's not even it's like it's in the same world as Matrix, but it's written in almost Elizabethan prose because that was the time of Shakespeare. And so it's got a lot of rhythms and a lot of words that I really loved from my research there. Um and it's I really love it. um I'm nervous about it because it's definitely my shortest book. um, and it's again like about women, God, climate change, death, right? It's about all of these
What
things.
else is there?
There's not much else. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I can't wait. And okay, we're a little bit
Thanks.
over time, so I guess I guess we will have to. These questions are good. Thank you guys for asking good questions, but we're at time, and so I can't wait for
Can I
everyone to read this book and also be texting their friends about it like I have been.
can I just say, Gia, it's such an honor to be asked questions by like the most brilliant human on the planet. So thank you so much for
No,
this.
I'm so
I
glad to
so
get to talk to you.
appreciate it.
I hope we get to actually see each other, and then we have to
I
talk so much
know.
more about what
I
these
can't
nuns got up
wait.
to.
Oh my
Um,
God,
but
absolutely.
thank you and congratulations, and I'm
Thank
excited for
you.
truly anyone who hasn't read the book yet to really get into here.